Okay.
Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Most of you know me. My name is Carol Stern, and I'm a librarian here at the Glen Cove Public Library. Before we begin, next month's author is Laura Spence Ash. I don't know if any of you wrote it. It was sort of a sleeper of a book. Beyond That, the Sea. It was really, really good. She'll be here Tuesday, April 8th at 2 o'clock virtually. So if you you can go on our website and sign up for that. Just FYI, after her, we have the Berlin apartment, and that's at 7 o'clock, May 13th, if you're interested. So Lara currently lives in Kona, Hawaii. She is a literary agent, author, prison reform advocate, and president of True Literary. Her memoir, Many Lives of Mama Love, is a 2024 Oprah Book Club pick and a New York Times bestseller. She has an MFA in creative writing, and apart from her own book, she is also a 5-time New York Times bestselling collaborative writer, including the #1 New York Times bestselling Designing Your Life and the 2018 Oprah Book Club pick, The Sun Does Shine, which she co-authored with Anthony Ray Hinton about 30 years as an innocent man on Albany's death row. In 2019, she won a Christopher Award for her work affirming the highest value of the human spirit, nominated for an NAACP Image Award, and shortlisted for the Dayton Literary Peace Prize. Lara is also the co-founder of the Gemma Project, a gender-responsive organization serving incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women with integrity and compassion. So, Lara, it's wonderful to have you. I feel like when I read a memoir, I get to know all about you and who you are, and I don't even know you, as a person. It's great. Your journey has been totally extraordinary. Like everyone, we all have our secrets, and your story beautifully illustrates how our lives can be both messy and beautiful at the same time. So if you want to have any questions, you can ask them at the end, or you could put them in the chat, and we'll try to get them all as they come in. So let me start with my first question. Can you tell us what inspired you to write the Many Lives of Mama Love, and was there a defining moment in your life that sparked that interest?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here at your amazing event. There's a lot of people here, and thank you to everyone who's taking time out of their day. And they just started like some lawn work or something. Now, I don't know if they're going after lava rock or something outside. So if it gets too loud, just let me know and I can grab headphones. So I don't know if you guys can hear it or not. But isn't that always the way? Right when you guys started, it was like the machines came on. I get asked a lot if there's anything off limits in questions, and I'm always like, have you read the book? So I'm not surprised that people feel like they know me. So the only reason to do the book was I thought it could help others. And mostly, I spent well over 11 years in so much shame post-incarceration, and that was way too long. And the moment I decided to book was really because for most of my time post-incarceration, almost a dozen years, I was so afraid of people Googling me, right? I was keeping this secret, which is really isolating and a lonely place to be when you're keeping secrets, and being deathly afraid someone will Google you. So it was only when I gave like a local TEDx talk in Santa Cruz, and I said the thing out loud that I was so afraid people would find out about me, and it had to do with the headline when I was sentenced 16 years ago this month. It called me the neighbor from hell, and I was so afraid I was so ashamed of that and so afraid people would Google that. And the minute I said it out loud, like, here's the thing I'm most afraid you're going to find out about me, and it was such a feeling of lightness. I can't even describe it. It was better than any pain medication I ever took, right? Like that feeling of just telling the truth. And I wanted more of that. And the thing I feared most is people would run screaming out of the room when I said, like, here's me at my worst. And the opposite happened. In that event, people applauded and stood up and applauded. But even with the book, people felt safe to tell me their secrets. And everybody has secrets. I have thousands of DMs of everybody's secrets. And the minute we just get honest about the things we're struggling with, it's such an invitation to others and it's so helpful to others.
Yeah, that's very, very true. Can you talk a little about your childhood? I mean, I know you talked about it in the book, but could you just talk about your childhood a little?
Yeah. It's interesting because I really did my entire childhood in like maybe a page, maybe paragraphs, page and a half. And I did that on purpose. I've gotten some flack from that where people wanted to know more, but it was a definite choice because people want a formula, right? They want to know like this plus this plus this is going to equal addiction. And there's no one formula for everyone. And I also sort of minimized it because I wanted to be the only villain in my story. That was really, really important to me. Like I didn't want, plenty of people have traumatic and chaotic childhoods like I did and don't end up stealing from their friends and neighbors and hurting their families and communities like I did. So that was a conscious choice. Simon Schuster did say, do you want to do a sequel or a prequel? And I said, no. I did the bonus chapter. I agreed to that for the paperback. Because sometimes you just get sick of telling your own story and talking about yourself. But my childhood, I grew up on the East Coast, in Concord and Brookline, Massachusetts. My parents divorced when I was born, and so I grew up pretty much with a single mom, and in a family with a lot of alcoholism and addiction and zero discussion about it. I didn't even understand what was going on. I just and I grew up with this idea that everybody else in the world had a normal family but me. And everybody else had a mom waiting with cookies when they got out of school. Like this was really what I believed. And so when I became a mother, part of it was like, I'm going to be that perfect mom that I imagine everyone else had and that I didn't have, and this perfect family. And that was a problem. That became a problem, having that expectations on myself, because when you're the perfect mom, you could never admit when you're struggling or need help. That's the downside of being the perfect mom. So my brother and sister, my sister was a very severe alcoholic as a teenager. She ended up dying as a passenger in a drunk driving accident. I don't even know if this is in the book. I don't think it's mentioned, but not in detail. When I was 19, my brother died of a heroin overdose, and no one talked about it. No one talked about our feelings. There was no language for emotions. And so I learned really early on to sort of be who I needed to be, to go to my friend's house for dinners and to be in their family. And, and everybody's parents loved me. And I really learned how to sort of adapt my personality to fit in wherever, just as a survival mechanism. And sometimes, your trauma responses become superpowers, and sometimes they don't.
It gave you a hard start from the beginning.
Yeah.
So you were so honest in the memoir. You've had many lives. I will can talk about them later, but your first addiction was reading, you said, but later clarified that your ultimate addiction was to escape. Can you tell us how it all started with the addiction and what you were trying to escape from?
Yeah. It's so easy to rear view mirror things and see the patterns and see when things started. In the time moment, you don't see it. But I remember, like I really thought that I could outrun this sort of affliction in my family, and I can out educate myself from it, So I left home right when I graduated high school, went straight to college, went straight to graduate school, went straight to having 3 boys in 4.5 years, postgraduate school, and really was committed to creating that happily ever after family. But I was, and I remember the first time I took, and again, this was before the opiate crisis was a crisis in the 90s, where pain medication, at least in California, and specifically Vicodin, was handed out in sample bubble packs. It was on a dish. Like think of like when you have a candy dish at home for visitors, like at the dentist, at the urgent care if you're just getting your ear checked, at the OBGYN, there was this dish of bubble wrap of Vicodin, and you just could grab one as a sample. It was just really pushed that way, and it was prescribed for everything. And so I was, I like to say I was a late bloomer to addiction and an overachiever, but it was I also believe it was always in me. But I remember the first time I took a pain pill for emotional pain rather than physical pain, and it was legitimately prescribed. and my marriage was falling apart. My first husband was cheating on me. I had 3 boys under the age of 5. And it was this realization that, oh my gosh, I am actually not going to create this perfect family. Like I can't, I've done everything I can and this marriage isn't going to survive. And my kids are going to grow up with 2 households and divorce. And it was devastating. And I think I was depressed. And even looking back now, because no one talked about it then, no one talked about mental health issues or depression. It's better now, not postpartum depression. You know, now I just read a book called The Mother Load, which is another Simon Schuster author. And I interviewed her and I was like, what if I had postpartum depression? And I was just like, I don't know. Like we didn't talk about those things, but I took that Vicodin and I had such a feeling of well-being. And what it did is it helped me pretend that everything was okay when it wasn't, which is what I learned to do as a kid. And it helped me, you know, being home with 3 little kids isn't the, you know, it wasn't the most exciting thing in the world, like put it that way. And so it made like folding laundry a little more exciting and playing army guys and just dealing with those struggles with toddlers a little easier. Those. And so so that was the first time, and that feeling of well-being and being able to pretend everything was okay, that I was okay when I wasn't. You know, it was 1 pill and then it took 2 and then it took, and then I was like, oh no, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to, and then I would quit and then I would start again and quit, you know, and this went on and off for years, until those pills, that 1 pill to have that feeling well-being took 60 a day to do that. 20 for breakfast, 20 for lunch, 20 for dinner. That's tolerance. And that's like the insidiousness of addiction. And then that led to smoking heroin, which that's another opiate. And I really did believe for a long time that when I had opiates, it made me braver. It made me better. It made me actually more connected to people, which is all I wanted. It made me smarter and funnier. It didn't make me sleepy. It didn't make me like pass out. In my brain, it had the opposite effect until, you know, and I was like, oh, I'm a better everything here. And I couldn't see, you know, it's so hard to describe addiction if you haven't experienced it yourself, but it is like, it gets to this point where it takes over everything, this compulsion and this belief that you will die without it. It feels like your very survival depends on it. And so I knew at the same time, it wasn't out of my mind. It was highly functioning. I knew that this is not who I was. I knew that this was not choosing life. I just thought, okay, tomorrow I'll fix it. Tomorrow I'll get it together. I knew right from wrong. I knew I wasn't living according to like who I actually was, you know, like who I am naturally is like, what do you need? I'll give it to you. Nancy, go lightly. What do you need? I'll give it to you. You need, you know, like that is my nature. So to know that and to know I'm also stealing from my friends and neighbors is so hard to reconcile. So I did know right from wrong, and I did hurt people I cared about, and I could not stop until I was stopped.
Yeah, it's amazing how you said you were you were highly functioning. It's hard to believe you could highly function like that.
Yeah, I mean, I was highly functioning with the pills, even at that amount. But from the time I first tried smoking heroin, which I swore I would never do, to the time of my arrest, it took 11 months about of that to commit crimes, to implode my life, to lose everything I had. It completely destroyed everything in a very brief time. From that moment. And before I had smoked that heroin, I'd had 6 years with nothing, you know, so that was like formative years. People don't really know that so much, but really, you know, for a good part of my children's lives, you know, they had a solid foundation with me of love and support and presence and all of that. And, you know, on and off. And then for, you know, 6 solid years before I relapsed. But with that relapse, it took only less than a year for everything to be destroyed.
So can you talk about the crime? Because in the book, you said you were part of the PTA and et cetera, and then you got addicted. How did you get the idea to steal from your neighbors? Like, what made you do that? And and then talk about what happened when you were found out.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, like a conscious, you know, no one's ever asked me that. There was no like conscious, you know, plotting. I'm not a criminal mastermind. I mean, honestly, I would use my friend's credit card at the store and I put in my own phone number to get the club card discount. right? Like with the stolen credit, that is not a criminal mastermind behavior. But it's really just this, when you feel like survival means that when you feel like, okay, tomorrow I'll get it together. I just have to do what I have to do today to survive and figure out how to get out of this. Then you just start acting in desperate, crazy ways. Like nothing was logical. Nothing made sense. Everything went against my moral compass. Like it was not there was no, Ocean's 11 master plan. It was just kind of survival in the desperation in the moment. Oh, that person I know just walked into private school and her purse is in the car and it's unlocked. Let me just grab $20 so I can buy lunch for my kids. Like things like that. And now I use my powers for good, but I have a tricky brain. Like I can strategize things how did I figure out the algorithm to just make up credit cards that worked? I have no idea. Like it was just, I was out of my mind, yet highly functioning. Like it was just craziness. And I was, and to be fair, it's harder to look highly functioning the deeper you get into that, those 11 months, and I came up with elaborate stories to explain why I wasn't showing up for things. Like I stopped showing up for all of those little league games and PTA meetings and driving carpool. And I would, I think I claimed my car got stolen like 5 times. My car's never been stolen, like it's just, you invent, and I got very skinny and my friend was actually expressed concern. And I said, oh no, I read the book, The Secret, and I manifested myself thin. It's amazing. Like I thought this was a brilliant lie. You think of these lies, that's what addicts do. Anything to protect your secret, right? Because your very survival feels like it depends on it. And it's really hard. And I get it. And I was the same way. It's really hard to reconcile, in that state. I love my children so much. I would have died for them in an instant. And I love my children so much. And I still couldn't stop the drugs because of that love. And that's really, really hard for people to understand. And we have so much judgment around that. And I certainly did. And I will be the first to say that I never even thought about incarcerated women, 80% of whom are mothers of minor children, until I became one, right? In my cul-de-sac neighborhood, in my book clubs, in my community PTA meetings, like it never came up. It was totally not on my radar. And so I have no judgment around people for that.
So what would you say to someone who is addicted, how to get them to stop before it really gets out of hand? Like, what would you do?
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard because it's so individual. I think, no one grows. I think it's important look, if there's 48 million people struggling with substance use disorder, addiction in this country right now, 48 million. Figure there's 1 to 3 people who love each of those persons. Like it's really hard. I won't make people raise their hands of the 200 plus people on this Zoom, but I guarantee I'm not the only family on here who's struggling with that. Like it's hard to find a family that doesn't have that somehow in their radar. And I think we heal in community, right? I think we heal we're only as sick as our secrets is a saying, but I do think this sort of shame and secrecy and this fear of judgment, we're wired to belong. We're wired to be in community. And when you're so isolated, I was completely isolated in my addiction, and I was completely isolated in my incarceration and post-incarceration, and none of that helps heal. And I think, it kind of goes to a larger individual thing. Like, are we actually people? Are we actually society? But are we actually individuals who believe in second chances, who believe in people's ability to change, who believe in redemption? And do we believe in it in real life, not just in theory, right? Not just in ideology. Like, do we believe in second chances enough to hire that second chance, or rent to that second chance, or let that second chance in our community group? Or because 1 out of every 3 Americans, this is men and women, are under some form of carceral control. They've been arrested, they're on probation, there's something. And if you don't know who in your friend group of 6 or 9 or 12, and when it's 1 and 3, that's because they're too ashamed to talk about it. And that's really isolating. And I don't think anything gets better in isolation, in silence.
It's hard. So getting back to the book, the police officers came to your house. Could you talk about how you hid the drugs and then what it felt like to get arrested?
Yeah. Yeah, there was, there's a pounding on the door, And hopefully none of you ever know this firsthand, but the police, they don't knock or ring the bell, they pound, right? It's a very specific pounding. And in that moment, there was panic, but there's a part of me that was relieved because I was going to be stopped. You know, the thing about that day that was so hard was, you know, I have 4 boys, and my youngest was the only one home because the other ones were in junior high and high school. My youngest was, you know, 3, about to turn 4. And the police came in and they put me in handcuffs, and my husband at the time, who's now my ex-husband, in handcuffs, and they wouldn't let me call someone to take him. And that was the moment when I just couldn't lie to myself anymore, when I knew like I had, there was no tomorrow to make this all better. Like tomorrow had, you know, tomorrow was too late finally for the first time. And they called Child Protective Services, and just that moment, which is still, which is traumatic, you know, and it's hard to call something trauma that you caused, right? Like I caused myself trauma in that moment, but, and him, luckily he doesn't remember it so clearly, but, you know, my son cried to me and never spent a day away from me, a night away from me. It was at that age of stranger danger, you know, they're very attached, and them pulling him out of the house, and him, I still get upset. So long ago, 16 years. But being a mom in handcuffs and you can't comfort your child, like there's, you know, that's the biggest wake up call I could think of. And it was really in that moment where I was like, wow, I've you know, I've imploded things so bad. Like there's no fixing this. So part of me was relieved to be stopped for the drug use, but the fallout and the collateral damage was unbearable. Sorry, I'm getting myself all emotional in the morning.
You'll get all of us emotional too.
It's too early to cry. It's only 8 a.m. here.
Yeah, it's really hard what you went through, you know, it's very tough. So you went to jail. You want to talk about that experience and you know, how it woke you spiritually?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, going in that police, you know, I lived in a place where police, you know, I lived in a cul-de-sac that didn't get filled up with police cars. Normally the police weren't there. And so I remember being driven to the jail in the back of the police car, and I was crying the whole way, asking, where's my son? Who has my son? Who's taking my son? And when we finally got to the jail, you know, walking in, the sheriff's deputy kind of grabbed my arm a little hard, right in between, you know, the outside and inside. There's this little entry port, and he said to me, you'll never see your son again. And he said to me, you should not be anyone's mother. And I actually believed him in that moment. And I didn't have any experience in the system to know, you know, there's no welcome brochure. There's no, this is what's going to happen. And I was so, you know, a couple nights later, I did try to end my life. And it was a decision because I just believed that I was more bad than good. I believed like, okay, I just failed at life. There is no future. There's no redemption arc. I'm never going to see my children again. I don't deserve a redemption story. That's for people who are good. That's what I really believed. And luckily I failed at that. I was failing at everything then. But in jail is really the women I was locked up with, unlike what you may see on movies or television shows. Like I said, 80% are mothers. They really explained to me the system in a way that the system was not explaining the system to me. And really we're all going through this thing together. They were a huge support system. They saved me. You know, in jails are not meant for long-term stays, but at least in California, and it varies county by county and state by state, you can be sentenced up to 3 years. And unlike prisons, there's not programming, there's not TVs, there's not in-person visitation necessarily in most jails. It's a really harsh situation to be for year after year after year. It's way harsher than prison, actually. And a lot of women are kept in jail, and there's, you know, so being in there, it was really, you know, looking back now, again, it's that rearview mirror. It was really a gift because every single identity I had carefully constructed in my cul-de-sac soccer mom, kids in private school life, where I couldn't break the mold, I couldn't admit I needed help, all of that was gone. I was not a mother, I was not a wife, I was not an employee or a boss or a community member. I was completely just me. And so the minute I decided was going to live, I had to begin this process of figuring out who I was for the first time in my life, separate from all of those identities. And I credit 2 books, from the little jail library that saved my life in there. The first one was The Power of Now. There's just one sentence in there. Like, one sentence in a book can save a life. And the sentence in there taught me how to quiet my mind. And in that book, it's the way to quiet, because I was spending all my time thinking about the future, worrying about the future, and sort of trying to rewrite the past, like we do. Like, if only I'd done this, why didn't I ask for help here? Why didn't I, I couldn't go to rehab because I couldn't imagine being 30 days away from my children. Little did I know, right? Why didn't I ask for help? Why didn't I, this person would have helped me, this constant, just relentless ruminating. And so there's a sentence in there where he says, if just say to yourself, I wonder what my next thought will be, and everything gets silent. And at first it was like this little millisecond of peace, and then it got longer and longer and longer. And jail is a great place to learn to meditate, but I'm sure there's community education programs, there's easier ways to do it than jail. But that book, and then Mark Nepo's Book of Awakening, also saved my life, where it was really the message I got from that was pain pushes until vision pulls. So it was really, this is months and months and months later with that book, where I started to have a different vision for my future, and become committed to not letting my pain, whether it's emotional or whatever it was, or environmental in that case, push me forward, but instead let something else, just kind of trust in some bigger vision for my life. And so that was a great gift. And really, it's just, again, one sentence in a book can save someone. It certainly saved me.
Reading is still an escapism for you, huh?
Yeah. I mean,
so it's for a lot of people.
Yeah. I mean, as a kid, reading was really how I escaped the chaos of my family, and writing, reading's that gateway drug to writing. And so I started writing was how I made sense of the world in my internal life. I stopped writing when I started taking those opiates, and I started writing again when I stopped taking opiates. No disrespect to Hemingway and Bukowski and all those, literary lushes who write great, get Pulitzers and Nobels for their literary works. But the 2 things can't coexist for me. It's one or the other, right? So the minute the drugs were gone in jail, I started writing again, and I learned to be a ghostwriter, writing letters as the other woman, which is probably a crime thinking about it now, but it's that empathy, that ability to sort of adapt myself and be other people, which was a trauma response earlier, really became a superpower in the literary world in terms of being able to really empathize so deeply that you can become someone else on the page and help them tell their story, or in this case, write letters so they could get treatment long-term treatment instead of prison, or get passes for graduations. I broke up with a lot of people. I seduced a lot of people. So that puts me in the spicy romance genre, whatever. But it wasn't even just the writing. It was that I was doing something that made me feel like I was valuable again at a time when I felt like I had no value to the community at all, that the community hated me and I was forgotten. So that feeling of I'm doing some good was amazing feeling.
Yeah, you did do good. I mean, these books are terrific, and especially people struggling with addiction. So you talked about in the federal prison, you received, you were pleaded guilty to 32 felonies, and you faced 27 years in prison. But your public defender told you that if you were not a white woman, you would not have been sent to federal prison. Can you talk about that whole issue?
Sure. Well, I wasn't in fact, I was in the local jail. I mean, I think one, I had some letters, because I hadn't spent a lifetime going in and out of jail, that helped. But, there's no doubt that Black and brown women, LGBTQ people are over criminalized and over sentenced and over penalized in the criminal justice system. And so I was really grateful to be given the sentence I was given. And I pled guilty to 32 felonies in a plea deal. I didn't do all those felonies. I didn't do 32 felonies. I didn't do that amount of money, but I would have pled guilty to 1,000 felonies and agreed to millions in restitution if meant I could see my children again. That was my only driving force. You know, and when you're in shame, you can't advocate for yourself. I didn't feel like I was I was so guilty and so in shame, so remorseful.
Yes.
I
Okay.
think Susan Friedman's came off mute. Yeah, there we go. And I think I had so much of that when you're in shame, you don't advocate. I couldn't say, wait, this is unfair. Wait, I never stole from anyone at Costco, you know, like whatever the things were. But I again, you know, even my public defenders all these years later, after reading the book, they're like, we're sorry. And I was like, no, you guys were amazing. Like I again would have pled guilty to everything if it meant I would not lose my children forever. I just could not fathom that. And I wouldn't have been able to survive that. So, you know, I don't begrudge that. And it kept me, you know, it got me so that I would be able to fight to get Caden back. So I had a ticking time clock and I would have paid, there's no dollar amount on that.
So when you for child protective services, you called child protective services on your husband DJ for drug use. So that was a turning point in your life. Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, so this was post-incarceration, and you know, my co-defendant with the same charges was my husband, who became my ex-husband. But when we got out, I mean, our experience in jail was very different. He was angry the whole time, and I was remorseful the whole time. You know, we were just on very different paths. And for me, what I went through was bad enough. Like I was never, you know, I swore when I got out, I would never go back. And I didn't. He went back. He struggled, took him a lot more years to give up the drugs. And so, you know, I write about in the book, we're just out of jail. We're just going through the process to get Caden back, meeting all the requirements. And we have this little 400 square foot apartment. So I'm going to sleep in the living room. Caden's going to have a bedroom. And I catch him snorting his antidepressants. And I was like, nope. You know, and it wasn't just that. Then I found out he'd been relapsing and was going, you know, he was, and so I just packed up everything of his. He had to go to jail for the weekend, which is part of drug court, and packed up everything. I put a washcloth right on top of the seat. The car we had was from his mom, so it was going to mean I had no car, but I didn't care. Like, and I told everyone, you know, I chose to believe, you know, I really had to believe that the system, CPS, court, probation, you know, the only way to get through all of that mentally and the like crazy requirements that were illogical and often conflicting from different agencies in the county was to have this belief system that everyone was on my side. Like that's the only way I could do it. I said, we're all on the same side. Everybody wants the same thing I do. Like whether it was true or not didn't matter. Like I had to have that belief system. And so, you know, it started this big debate in probation, like is snorting antidepressants is like that drug behavior? And, you know, like people working with me in the system really believed it was. People working with him were trying to excuse it in the same system. Like it was just like, it was a whole thing. But I knew I was never going to go back to the place I was in. And so if that meant getting rid of a husband, I got rid of a husband. It meant being homeless, I would have been homeless. If it meant, you know, whatever it took, I was willing to do that because it was bad enough for me. That's the only way I can explain it. Like there's no part of me, even now, 16 years later, when hard things happen, it doesn't even cross my mind that like, oh, a coping skill. I have other coping skills now, but I'd never like a coping skill is like, oh, let me get a little high. That might help. Like that's not a coping skill it doesn't even cross my mind, which I'm grateful for. And it's been relatively easy for 16 years to not have drugs cross my mind. But part of that is there's no part of me that thinks that's the solution to my problems. Like it's like, you know, it's crazy thinking to me. So the minute I saw that behavior, I was like, not going to be around it, even if it means being alone.
Good for you. Good for you. So you earned the name Mama Love in the G block.
Yes.
Talk about that a little.
So everyone, all women get a nickname in jail. So, you know, if you're ever doing this in your individual book clubs, I've had a lot of book clubs try to come up with their jail nicknames with each other. Very fun. And, you know, my closest friend in jail friends were 19 and my oldest son was 17. So I was, even though I wasn't that old, I was like an elder in there, and I was a mom with nowhere to put her mom energy, but with all of, and you know, almost close to 100% of women in jail, incarcerated women, have histories of childhood trauma, whether it's or domestic violence or physical or sexual abuse. Like it's, you know, like my dream is for all the trauma researchers in the world, like, here's your population, like, do your good here. You have this population in desperate need of it, and in a system that's re-traumatizing and triggering every day for them. So, you know, I had all that mom energy to give. And, you know, the culture of jail was, the power struggles were similar to like book club or PTA, to be honest, you know, like who's in charge. And so it wasn't all that unfamiliar, and I'm pretty good at reading people. I think it's a skill. And you know, what I had to learn there is like nothing can be done for free because that's suspicious. So, you know, like I write in the book, like I wrote some letters to people. I had my bed made the whole time, and I was not great at making my bed to the level in which it's like the military has to be very, you know, tight. And so someone made my bed, and I, you know, I ate a lot of bear claws. I got paid in bear claws as a writer, which is not the worst way to be paid in there. But yeah, but mostly I would like, you know, who I am without drugs is, you know, I like to help. I like to fix problems. I like to do that. So I kind of just reverted to my natural self in there. And that was my nickname, and it stuck, you know.
And it was the title of your book. So can you talk about the multiple layers and how you came up with the title? I mean, I guess you sort of just explained a little, but.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't the original title of my book, actually. The CEO, Simon Schuster, and I had not an epic battle, but there was a lot of discussion at Simon Schuster. My book, you know, nonfiction books, unlike fiction, if anyone, I'm sure there are writers on the call, fiction, you got to write the whole book first. With nonfiction books, whether it's big idea or science or memoir, you write a book proposal, the book sells, and this is in traditional publishing model, and then you have a year to write the manuscript. So when I sold the book from proposal, the original title that I sold it with, which I was very attached to and thought was very clever, was called The Neighbor from Hell and Other People I Have Been. And then in the process, Simon Schuster was like, we're going to change the title. You know, they're doing their market research and talking to sales. And they had a whole list of suggestions for me, and some of which I was like, no, I would never refer to myself that way. You know, but that one, you know, the CEO of Simon Schuster said, look, no one wants to hang out with the neighbor from hell. That can't be your title. And I said, well, that's kind of the whole point of the book. And part of the reason I was so attached and closed-minded around that title was that headline haunted me for years. It was really the thing I was so ashamed of. So it felt empowering to like own it and turn it into something else. But they were right. I'm so glad it was The Many Lives of Mama Love, because I have had many lives even before I was arrested. That's one life. And, you know, I think, you know, one of the themes in the book is that, you know, I made a whole identity out of this worst version of me. Right. And then, you know, judged other people for doing that to me, but I was doing it to myself also. And so it felt good to just sort of, we all have many lives, you know, like I did a book called Designing Your Life with Stanford professors. You're going to have 5 completely different careers in your life. Careers, not jobs, but careers. You know, we all have different versions and seasons of ourselves. And so, so that's really what the many lives are. I had life before I had children. I had life with children. I had life and my children had life before I was arrested. The problem is that the minute you're arrested, the minute you become a felon, everything good you've done before that, everything you are before that gets erased. And anything good you do after that kind of gets tinted and colored by that and mitigated by that and lessened by that. And so, yeah, so I'm happy with the title. They were right. It's hard for me to admit, but yes, they were right.
It is a good title.
Yeah.
So, your first job out of jail was Ideal Architects. How did you get that? And
Yeah.
talked about that in the book too, but you can explain it a little.
Yeah. So it was a couple years, and I really believed when I got out of jail that I would be done. Like I really was like, okay, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this, and I'll be done. Like I had no idea all the ways that I would be expected to pay and how, how easy it is for generations to pay, right? So it was about 2 years post incarceration. I was really struggling. I had full custody of Caden. It's really hard to get a job with 32 felonies on your record. That's just the reality. And the number one predictor of recidivism, meaning that women will go back to jail, is poverty, right? So as a woman, you may make 87 cents on the dollar as it is. As an incarcerated woman, you're gonna make 67 cents on the dollar if you can even find someone to hire you. And it varies again by state and county, but so I was struggling. So I saw a Craigslist ad for a part-time personal assistant at a literary agency, 5 to 10 hours a week. It had a ridiculous amount of really deep essay questions for this 5-hour week, $20 an hour. But I was like, $20 an hour, I will have made it. Like we'll survive, So I did it, and it was really important to be honest, but I had a don't ask, don't tell about my past. Like if he asked me in the interview, were you ever incarcerated? I would say yes, but he didn't ask, and I was not going to volunteer that. And and I recognize the privilege of being able to present as someone where that wouldn't cross their mind, right? Where there's not this automatic bias that I'm suspicious. And I've walked into his home, and it took weeks before he actually Googled me and found out. But luckily, I had the opportunity to prove my intelligence. Now, this Craigslist ad said he worked with the Dalai Lama. And I was like, am I going to get murdered? Right? Like, who's advertising on Craigslist who works with the Dalai Lama? I mean, with the Desmond Tutu. And so I went to the interview. I did, I really poured all my writing skills into those essay questions and answered them honestly. And I had an MFA in creative writing, before I was incarcerated, and I had worked at small press. So I had a good background. I taught writing. And so, so I got hired, as a 5-hour a week assistant, personal assistant even. And when I left 12 years later, I was CEO, and we had grown it into one of the biggest nonfiction literary agencies in the world, and used huge team. And I had collaborated on that time at 12 books for the agency for authors, because, the odds that you are a world leader or top scientist and also like really good narratively in writing are slim. And so a lot of nonfiction books have collaborative writing help. It's not ghostwriting, which was kind of invented for celebrity tell-alls, and the standard of writing is low. So one of the first books I was working on, the second book actually, was the Book of Forgiveness by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. So I had no idea how to forgive myself at that time. And but there was something, again, it's like the looking back, I was like, oh, that helped me with forgiving myself and compassion for myself. And this helped me, working with this neuroscientist helped me integrate my story and look at neuroplasticity and the messages. Like every book I worked on helped me. And I was working with these amazing world leaders and Stanford professors and thought leaders, and pouring out, everything I could into the writing, hiding in the acknowledgments, and I realize now what I was doing, because I worked really, really hard, probably not in the healthiest way, right? Like I was so desperate to prove myself good and valuable. And it was like, there's two trains going, right? And the whole time I'm keeping my past a secret. My boss knew it, Doug, after he Googled me. But all the authors I was working with did not know it. And so it was like, here's the truth train. And that truth train is always going to come to its final destination, right? The truth's always going to come out, I believe. And so I was frantically on this other train, building my resume of goodness, right? So I could be like, look, Nelson Mandela thanked me in the acknowledgements. I did his book, and Archbishop Tutu and all these good people. I'm so good adjacent. I'm good. Like I really felt like when those trains crash, I'm going to need to have a resume to defend my goodness and my humanity. I don't feel that way now, but that's really what I was doing for, over a decade, is really trying to desperately prove to the world that I was good and valuable again. And really, I was trying to prove it to myself, because when the truth came out, people were really like, okay, like it wasn't as big a deal as it was in my head, they were like, okay, want to have lunch? Like it wasn't as this, crisis that I had, again, as much as that meditation practice, still like worried about and lived in fear of and in isolation, because I can't, you know, I can't make friends with you. We're not going to have a real friendship because I'm not going to tell you about my past because you won't want to be friends with me. Like, it's so isolating to do that. And, you know, and again, the opposite happens. People actually feel safe to be friends with you and share the thing, you know, the messy parts of themselves and the secrets. And yeah, so, you know, I loved that job, being in the world of books again. That was one of the gifts of incarceration, because that was my first love and my final love. You know, my background is in fiction writing. So did I think I would write 14 nonfiction books? Absolutely not. I was like, not, you know, but it was really amazing in that, again, those early childhood trauma gifts really paid off in terms of being able to assume the identities. And, you know, at the beginning you asked, like, why do the book? Also, like, objectively, as a literary agent, you look for crazy stories that no one's heard before. So like, if I'm objectively as a literary agent looking at my own story, I didn't agent myself because, like, therapists need therapists, agents need agents, but you know, to go from, like, technically what I was charged with using my friend's credit card was identity theft, to then go to like being paid to assume people's identities and write books as them. This is just a crazy story, right? It's just a crazy, ridiculous story. And that's why I love true stories, right? They're so, if they were fiction, they'd be unbelievable. You'd be like, you can't make, that's not believable. But real life is so much crazier than fiction, I think.
So were you afraid when this book came out? I mean, you actually sat down and wrote this book, and then were you afraid to people's reactions? And then how did you get involved with Oprah?
Yeah. So I was afraid. It was about 3 weeks before the book was going to come out. And all of a sudden I woke up one morning and I had this, like, you know, that those dreams you have where you're like unprepared for a math test, or you're naked in front of the class or giving a talk, like, you know, those kind of like terror dreams. And I had this sick feeling like, oh my gosh, what have I done? Like, I can't undo this. It's coming out in 3 weeks. I felt exposed. I felt naked. I felt vulnerable. I was like this sick feeling like you've eaten too much cotton candy, or you just overshared, right? like, oh, I just met you and I told you too much, you know, like that feeling, but like on steroids. And I was like so scared. And there's nothing I could do about it. But, you know, now, like, you know, when I'm scared, I talk to people. So I talk to friends about it. And when it came out, you know, the response was great. And it was only, you know, Simon Schuster sent me on an old-fashioned book tour, which I didn't always do. And so I was gone for a few weeks. And then it was only when I actually came back into my own hometown, and I do improv, this like group I write about in the book, like this group that was sort of embraced me and became my little, you know, tribe of misfit toys with me. And I walked into improv after being gone on a book tour for a few weeks. And I swear, you know, in my mind, in my like recalling of it, the entire theater went silent when I walked in. I was like, and I had this moment, I was like, oh my God, they all read my book and know all these things about me. It was like, it was almost harder with people I knew than with strangers that I just meeting, right? Because I was, you know, pretty, you know, I was only going to do the book if I was honest. I was really honest in the book. And you know, the other thing is I did let all my children, my 4 boys, read it before it was too late to change anything. They're the only ones I would have changed anything for. I changed names. I did ask my ex-husbands, 2 of them, if they wanted their names changed. They did not. But my children were, you know, I was most nervous for them to read it, and mostly Kate, and it turned out fine. And they were super supportive and were at book launch events with me. And, you know, Caden is 18 at that point. So when he read it, he was senior in high school on winter break. And, you know, being an 18-year-old boy, he came in after he read. I was nervous. I kept checking on him, and they locked me out of his room so he could read it, because he'd been asking for 6 months and I just kept putting it off. And so, and then he came in and he said, and mostly I wanted him to, you know, there was things in there that he didn't know about his dad. So I did let his dad read it. Not that I would have changed anything for DJ, because it was all the truth, but I wanted him to know what Caden was going to know, right? So that he could process with Caden too. And so Caden came in, and because he's an 18-year-old boy, he was like, you know, some parts were boring. And I was like, really, what? He's like, the parts I wasn't in, you know, like he was like, you know, and then he found a typo, and it was before it got to copy editing. He wanted me to pay him for the typo. Like, it was very typical senior boy in high school response. It wasn't, but he did say, you know, I didn't know any of that. And he said, it's like, it was like watching a movie, you know. And part of it was like, have you not read a book in high school? Like there's a little bit of that because he's a computer science major, but I think it was good. You know, I never knew my mom's interior world. I never knew what she was thinking and feeling growing up in that generation. And my mom's generation had a lot of secrets. You know, 23andMe is breaking girl code on that whole generation.
Mm.
And and so it made, you know, I write that like the whole experience made me a better mother. And part of that was because it made me a more real mother. Like when I got out of jail, with my kids in junior high and high school and college, and even as young adults now, there's nothing that they feel like they can't talk to me about. And one of the gifts was I was the adult that their friends felt like they could say anything to. So because I wasn't going to come from a place of judgment. Like my pedestal, I was, you know, I was so far from standing on a parent pedestal, right? Or an adult pedestal. Like that had been kicked out from underneath me. And I was like right there, like, yeah, we all struggle and we've all messed up. And so I think that was a real gift for me. And my priorities changed as a parent. You know, before I went to jail, I was like, they all have to get into Stanford, right? Because I didn't get into Stanford. It was the one school I didn't get into, so I had a grudge. And so I was like, they'll have to get into Stanford. And the experience in jail when I got out, I was like, they all actually have to be happy. Like that's the priority. That's the conversation to have. Like not the expectation, like what is going to make you, and, you know, it's a conversation for all of us to have. Like you know, I still think about what I want to be when I grow up. And I'm like, you know, I'm on the downward quarter of life, but so I think it really fundamentally changed the trajectory of their lives that way. And they're, you know, I'm 100% biased, but they're like amazing humans. And you know, the forgiveness, you know, the forgiveness was automatic. They just wanted me to be okay, you know. And then the trust I had to earn back, and part of earning that back was from the second I walked out of jail, I showed up. If I said I was going to be there, I was there early, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. And when my oldest son Dylan went to college, you know, the year after I got out of jail, it was like maybe a few months into college, and he called me and said, Mom, I need to switch all my mail to go to your house because you're the only adult I can trust because Dad keeps losing my mail. And I was so proud of that moment. I'm the adult you can trust. Like what that meant to me. It's just mail. It's just 40 mail. You know, he just wanted to get his car registration or whatever it was. But like that kind of thing. And it's still that way, you know, year after year after year. And that's what I just had to do. And you know, you show up enough, and that's the story your children have of you, no matter what.
Very heartwarming. And I'm glad you were able to build back a relationship with them. That's great. So the book is being made into a TV series.
It's been optioned, but Hollywood moves very slow. And on average, it takes 7 years. So we'll see. It was optioned from the proposal. Actually, right before it even sold to Simon & Schuster got options. So what actually happens, we don't know. There's no like definitive thing yet. It's just kind of been in that option development limbo for a long time.
Yeah, these things take a long time from what I see or read.
Yeah.
So what are you working on next? You said
So
you're book.
yeah, I'm working on another book. And so I'm doing it from Hawaii. And I have a new literary agent, because my next book is fiction. I'm writing a novel. It's about women and secrets. But you know, the reality is this group, not included, is that most people in the world don't read. And when they do read, they read fiction. And they certainly they don't, you know, always read nonfiction. They read, and if they read memoir, they're reading celebrity memoirs. Like it's all really hard. And so, you know, my background is, and what I think I'm good at is actually fiction writing. That's what I had my MFA in. So, you know, I spend time thinking, like, this is going to sound morbid, but it's helpful. I'm on my deathbed. What will I regret not doing? That's how I decide how I spend my time now and what I'm focusing on. What will I regret not doing? And I will regret not writing a novel. So I'm going to be a debut novelist next year, hopefully at this time. But I have a new agent, fiction agent, who's amazing. And And, you know, unlike nonfiction, I have to write the whole thing first. So I'm working on that every day besides running my literary agency. But yeah, so hopefully that works.
I'm sure it's going to be great, and you'll have to come talk to us again when
Yeah, I loved it. So it'll be so much easier to talk about fictional characters.
I read mostly fiction too. And
Yeah,
your
so do
book,
I as a
like, I
reader.
have to tell you, your book read like a fiction book. I couldn't put it down. You know,
Yeah, I mean, as a reader, I have two genres. You know, as a literary agent, there's, you know, all the genres and the categories that they do on in Publishers Marketplace and in the world. But me personally, as a reader, as someone who loves books, I have two categories of books: those you can put down and those you can't. And so I always want to do this one. And like, you know, nonfiction. My book is nonfiction, but I really tried to design it in a way, like my structural choices were like the fact that it's in first person, you know, well, it's always first person memoir, but in present tense is to create this urgency, to create this reader like right there with you. You know, memoir is the closest you can get into another person's consciousness, right? If you understand how someone else in the world thinks, like read a memoir from someone who thinks differently you, because you are in their mind making their questionable life choices with them, potentially, in my case, you know. But I really designed it in a way like first line, last line, like that's my jam. If I had a dream job, I would just be in a tower giving titles and first lines, last lines to chapters, because, you know, you have to really keep people engaged and turning the page and invested in it. So I made a lot of structural choices that way. And I had some false starts, did not come naturally. And took me a minute to find my own voice after being so many other people, 12 books as men, even, to find my own voice in my own story that was like real. Someone said to me in an interview last week, like, you talk just like you write. And I was like, that is the best compliment, right? Because that's how you know you're being real. So but yeah, so I'm hoping I can pull it off with fiction, and that's the goal. I like to have big, crazy, delusional goals always in front of me.
well, keep going because you do a great job.
Yeah.
I'm done with my questions, and I know it's getting late. Do you have time to take some
Yeah,
questions?
of course.
Let me see if I can quickly go through some of these. Just anything you didn't touch upon. Loved your book from Amy Cohn and your mission. Love the sun does shine. I loved your book. I'm hosting a book at my library on 3/13. Would you love to share the contents? That was Julie Klein. I think she's local. Love your book. You loved your book. You tell my story. I have 4.5 years in recovery from Grace Lyons, and I read your book in one day. I felt so seen and heard. Thank you for sharing and reminding me how strong and resilient we are. I am also a neighbor from hell. I have just recently shared my news footage and my Google search with my patients. I work in the recovery community. Good for you. Loved your book. Thank you for joining us today. Loved your book. Your stories. I've walked through many with parents as a high school principal. Your storybook could be so help to heal others. Have you found this to be true? From Karen Steen.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, I told you I have like, you know, a lot of messages with people's secrets. The message I never anticipated getting, I have a lot of young people who have either lost their parents to addiction or incarceration, you know, who have a parent that didn't make it to the other side. A lot of young people who've writing me and saying that it's helped them have a little more compassion and depersonalization of what their parents are going through, that isn't about their love or lack of love for the child. And some people have decided to reconnect with parents. I've had people message that they decided to get, you know, to go to rehab, you know, and I guess that, you know, I've got asked this question, like, if there's anything you could change, you know, in your story, it's this, you know, I think, or tell the younger you, it's just, you know, if I could unlearn that inability to not be able to ask for help, you know, like that's the thing, because I had people who would have helped me and I just hadn't, I couldn't be honest in that way and ask for help and admit that I didn't have it all together and and I was struggling in that. And if I could change that about myself, I would, you know, and just, you know, that realization that I really thought there's no way I could go to rehab for 30 days and be away from my children, and then being away for a year, and in some ways away from my older ones forever, because it took me a long time to rebuild my life so that I had a place for them. And meanwhile, they're getting older and older, right? So, you know, by the time I had a place where let's all live under the same roof, they're like, I'm living with my girlfriend, right? So, or I'm at college. So, you know, in some ways I couldn't get that back. And that's been hard to grapple with. The physical thing, the emotional thing with my children came back right away. I mean, it never left, to be honest. And that's hard for people to understand too, but, I do see a question that came in that said, do you keep in touch with the women you were in jail with? And, you know, one of the things like in jail, we were a real community with each other and helped each other and supported each other. But when you get out of jail, we can't hang out with each other because we're felons, right? Felons cannot, it's a probation violation. And I certainly wasn't going to hang out with anyone who wasn't on the same path with me. Like if I wasn't going to do it with my husband, I was not going to do it with someone I met in jail. So, but I have stayed in touch. There's a few people that I stay in touch with, like through social media more, who are doing well. There's a lot who, because, you know, when I went to jail and was struggling with opiates, fentanyl wasn't a thing. And now it is, who have passed away from overdosing, like the mother and daughter in my book, who said this is the best home we've ever had together. Both of them passed away from overdoses. And then after the book came out, I had some people who reach out that I had lost contact with, who are doing really well. Like, you know, Princess is killing it in Silicon Valley in marketing. She got out of prison 5 years ago, got an MBA and is doing great. And others are drug and alcohol counselors, and others were doing well. And then like the nature of addiction, they relapse. I just got word yesterday of, you know, the woman who waved me over my first night in jail, if you read the book, to see if I had brought anything in behind that closed door. I just got, and I'm not going to give her real name, but I know all the women by their real names, not that I changed their names in the book, but I just got word that she passed away 2 days ago. So everyone's been reaching out. And this is 16 years after we were in jail together. And she was a drug and alcohol counselor, and you know, and happened. She had 3 children, I believe 3. So it's hard, you know, it's like it's rare to, you know, like the world needs more stories of people getting onto the other side of addiction, you know, I think, you know, it's like when Roger Bannister broke that 4-minute mile, which is one of the titles of my chapter, the 4-minute mile in the book, not about recovery but when people see it's possible, because when you just get those messages, like it's so rare to get out of addiction. But when people know it's possible, because it's possible for more people, when one person does it, more people believe they can do it, and then they do it, right? It's like this sort of collective consciousness that happens. And I think, you know, similarly to like, no one can ever break the 4-minute mile, but someone does it, and then more people do it, and then that's a new standard. So I just think we need more stories. You know, we need to do the reality of addiction and the struggle, but we also need more stories of people who both get to the other side of it, and people who society lets them get to the other side of it. You know, one of the things, you know, I believe I should go to jail. I committed crimes, I should pay for them. But I do believe we have to actually let people pay for them. Like we have to let people pay, right? And, you know, when I moved Caden into college, it was this moment where it was the first moment I felt proud of myself, not with those New York Times bestsellers, not with like Oprah, but moving him into college. It was the first time I excelled since my arrest, since he was taken away, because I was like, we did it in that moment, right? Because having 2 incarcerated parents, he's way more likely statistically to be going to prison than to going to UC San Diego with a 4.0. It's not an easy school to get into. But it was the first moment that I was like, I'm so proud of him, but I'm so proud of me. Like I was really proud of myself, but I was just like, oh, that took it, you know, 14 years, but we did it, you know, and it shouldn't take so long. You know, but if we don't let people pay for their crimes, if we don't actually believe in second chances, that's how generations pay, you know. Like I paid off all my restitution, but even some of like, there, you know, very little criticism with my book, you know, like a handful of people with strong feelings. But one was like, well, she shouldn't make any money off her story. And I was like, so I shouldn't be able to pay for my son's college, so he shouldn't go to college. Like, you know, like this way in which, like, if we send it someone and we agree in the system, this is their punishment. And if they do this, they get out. And if they do this, they're free. Then we have to let them be free. We have to let them, like, I believe people rise to the level you believe in them every single time, and especially people who feel forgotten and devalued and dehumanized in the world. Like, you believe in them, like Doug did with me. He believed in me, so I was never going to. I was the best employee ever. I wouldn't take a penny from that man, you know, like I wouldn't steal a minute of time even, you know, like because it felt so good to have someone trust you again and believe in you that you would not do anything to violate that. You know, I could argue why incarcerated people might make your best employees, but that's a whole other meeting.
Well, you really are truly amazing. It's unbelievable what you've gone through and where you've become. It's terrific.
Thank you.
You should be very proud of yourself. So
Thank
somebody asked in the questions about the bonus chapter. Lara had said it was in the new.
So it's in the paperback that just came out in February. It's called Stand By Me, and it goes into 2020, starts in 2024, so just last year, and goes up through April of 24, which is my son Cody got married. First, we had 2 weddings. Dylan and Cody got married. But you know, memoirs end and life keeps on lifing, and so the 2024 came in very hot. So it's in the paperback version. It's not in the hardback. It won't ever be in the hardback. But if you got the book on Audible or Kindle, if you re-download it, if you delete it and re-download it, it'll be in there for free. So you don't have to buy the book again, right? Or go to, you know, hopefully libraries will have the paperback. I don't know how that works. Carol knows, but yeah, the bonus chapter is called Stand By Me, which was the song that Cody and I chose for our mother-son dance. The chapter, like the behind the scenes title of the chapter was Death, Divorce, and Oprah. So that gives you a hint of what's in there. So that's all I'll say.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it. And
Thank you.
Lara,
So much.
just on a side note, if you could email me your address in Hawaii, we can send you an honorarium because I don't think I have that.
Oh, thanks. Okay, I'll have.
I think I have in California, but just send me your Hawaii.
Okay, awesome.
And thank you everybody for joining in. It's always a pleasure.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was terrific.
Terrific.